Hi, this is the Apologist Bookshelf, and I'm Gary Zacharias. I really appreciate you joining me today. I've got a new book that I want to take a look at. Well, I say a new book. It's not brand new. It came out about 10 or 12 years ago, but it's new to me, and finished reading it not too long ago. It's called The Intolerance of Tolerance. Isn't that a word that we hear a lot? Both, actually. We hear, "Oh, you're so intolerant," or she's such a tolerant person." So this is D.A. Carson is the author. He's a research professor of the New Testament at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Now, maybe he's retired. I don't know if he's still there, but he's written a lot of other books, and people really give it some high praise here. On the back cover, president of a theological seminary said, thoughtfully shows how tolerance has morphed into a pervasive insistence that no one should hold firm convictions. Yeah, that's kind of sad. Christianity Today says Carson shows the structural flaws and inconsistency of modern tolerance and its fixation on opposing traditional Christianity. And they call the book A Call for Christians to Fight for the Value of Truth. Boy, I give that a hearty amen. What happened to truth? Doug Groothuis calls it truth decay. I love the title. It has decayed in our society. Truth is not valued as it once was, or at least it's a new definition of truth. So let me start with this book. I'm going to be coming back to it periodically, but I would like to start by giving us a quick look at his first chapter, and he calls it The Changing Face of Tolerance. He says, if you talk about the intolerance of tolerance, which is what he's titled his book, he said that seems like nonsense. It's an oxymoron. It's like parting of such sweet sorrow, as Juliet says. He says tolerance is huge now in Western culture. He said it's becoming a lot like motherhood and apple pie. He said, if you write a book like I have done with this title, it says, if you say that tolerance might occasionally be intolerant, he said, you're not going to win many friends. He says, it's become part of our Western culture. It's just huge. It's just taken over. He said the notion of tolerance, I think this is crucial. And if you don't get anything else out of this chapter, and I don't get anything else out of this chapter, this is a good spot to hit really hard. The idea is the notion of tolerance is changing. And now, because it's got a new definition, tolerance itself has changed. He said, the sad reality is this new contemporary tolerance is actually intolerant. It's blind, he says, to its own shortcomings. It thinks it holds the moral high ground. And he's going to explore this as the book goes on. It can't be questioned. It's just part of your society. It's like a fish questioning water. It's just all around you. He says, worse thing than that, though, is this new tolerance is socially dangerous and intellectually debilitating. Wow. So you'll see how that plays out later on. So Carson says, let's begin with dictionaries. He goes to the Oxford English Dictionary. He said one of the definitions is for tolerance is to bear without repugnance, to allow intellectually or in taste, sentiment, or principle, to put up with. It says Webster says something like that, to allow, to permit, not interfere with, to recognize and respect others' beliefs without necessarily agreeing or sympathizing. And that's it. That's the key thing, isn't it? To put up with, to bear, to tolerate somebody. So that's fine, but he said, watch what's happening. It used to be you accept the existence of different views. You'd maybe have a Muslim next door and you'd say, he or she doesn't believe what I believe, but that's okay. We'll go from there. Well, that was the old view. Now it's not accepting the existence of different views, it's accepting the views themselves. I'm sure you can see the difference there. Not just recognizing other people's right to have different beliefs, but accepting the views of other people. That's huge. It says it's one thing to accept that a different or an opposing position exists and deserves the right to exist. Sure, that's fine. But then the new tolerance says actually accepting another's position means believing that position is true, or at least as true as your own. Well, there we go. So we've gone from free expression of contrary opinions to accepting all the opinions. So if I've got that Muslim next door to me and I want to be tolerant in the new sense, I can't say, well, the Muslim is wrong in my belief, but I would certainly tolerate him being my neighbor and him having the right to say this. Now it's got to be, if I want to be tolerant, I have to accept the Muslim beliefs as true, or at least as true as my own. He says we're moving from allowing the free expression of contrary opinions to the acceptance of all opinions. We leap from permitting claims that we don't necessarily agree with to asserting that all the beliefs and all the claims are equally valid. So he said that's how we slide from the old tolerance to the new. Carson continues by talking about next section of this first chapter, sharpening the contrast between the old tolerance and the new. So he says under the old form of tolerance, a person would be judged tolerant if he or she had strong views, but insisting that others had the right to dissent from those views, let them argue their own cases. You know, it's that old line from Voltaire. Apparently he may not have really said this, but it certainly gets his idea across. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. So this older view of tolerance has three assumptions, Carson says. One, there is truth, objective truth out there, and we have to pursue that. Two, the various parties in a dispute think they know what the truth is, even if they disagree. Each party thinks the other one is wrong. That's part of that old tolerance idea. Number three, nevertheless, they hold the best chance of uncovering the truth is not by coercion, it's exchanging ideas, no matter how silly or wrong-headed some of those ideas may seem to us. So the idea is we shouldn't be crushing or silencing our opponents. We need to hear what they have to say. We need to take them on and wrestle with them and see who's right. The point is free inquiry will bring the truth out. It's going to convince probably the greatest number of people. So that's sharpening that contrast, as he says here. Let me skip ahead here. So he says the older view of tolerance held either that truth is objective and can be known. Okay, so that's that there's truth out there and we could know it if we just talk to each other. We've got to be tolerant of people who disagree and that truth will win out. So that's one view of this older idea of tolerance. Or that old view of tolerance may say, gee, we're not sure truth could be known in some domains like religion, so the best thing we should do is just to be benign and friendly and tolerate and to realize that we have limited perspective, limited knowledge. Oh, but by contrast, what does the new tolerance say? There is no one view that's exclusively true. Strong opinions are just that. They're just preferences. Each version is equally true. Kind of like you like chocolate, I like strawberry ice cream. What's to argue about? It's all true for us, isn't it? So we have to be tolerant, according to this new view, not because we can't figure out the right path from the wrong path, but because all paths are equally valid. They're equally right. So here's the problem. He says intolerance is no longer refusing to allow contrary opinions to have their say, but they have to be understood as questioning or contradicting the view that all opinions are equal in value. So did you hear that? That makes sense? So today, what's the view of intolerance? That's if you disagree that all opinions are equal in value, that all worldviews have equal worth. That's what you're saying, that all stances are equally valid. Wow. He quotes from a professor, our idea is that to be a virtuous citizen is to be one who tolerates everything except intolerance. The United Nations says tolerance involves a rejection of dogmatism and absolutism. And then Carson says, if you hear that, tolerance involves the rejection of dogmatism. Doesn't that sound dogmatic? Yeah, exactly. See, this is the problem. This new tolerance is actually very intolerant. If you disagree with them, are you going to get it? Yeah. Here's an executive vice president of the National Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity says, the definition of the new tolerance is that every individual's beliefs, values, lifestyle, and perception of truth claims are equal. There is no hierarchy of truth. Your beliefs and my beliefs are equal, and all truth is relative. Yeah, so it's slid right into the whole relativism thing. Of course, as Carson points out, and I'm sure all of us have thought about, if all values and all beliefs are worthy of respect, does that really apply to every single value, every belief? Does that include Stalinism, Nazism, child sacrifice, the Ku Klux Klan, and other racist groups? Really? All truth is relative. Everybody is supposed to be tolerant of everybody else. I don't see that myself in the news. I hear people on the far left talk about the intolerance of certain people, and there's a lot of anger about that. I don't see the kind of tolerance that used to be considered as the way to show your tolerance. He says, for the moment, it's enough to observe that under this whole new banner of tolerance, no absolutism is permitted. So you can't say Jesus is the only way, for example. All you can do is prohibit absolutism, right? That's the only thing you get rid of. Anybody that thinks they're right. Wow. And he says, what you hear when the new tolerance is in charge, people throw out these comments. They call them bigoted or narrow-minded or ignorant. Yeah, we hear that a lot these days. And in fact, that charge of intolerance, he says, has gotten a lot of power in most of our culture today. Oh, yeah, definitely. He says, here's a problem with it. The new tolerance avoids serious engagement over difficult moral issues. So what does it do? It just says tolerant or intolerant. It doesn't really take a look at the support or the proof or the opinions themselves. So that's really sad. Let's go to the end of the chapter here. He says, if you take a look at what the people in the Middle East think, it's pretty funny. They think the advocates of the new tolerance are kind of out there, right? That they're not thinking deeply enough. Too few people, he says, on both sides ponder how you could build a culture in which people could disagree and still tolerate the opponents because they're human beings made in the image of God. That's crucial. And that's not being heard. That's not being said these days. This podcast is being produced and put together during a current political season, and I can just hear that all the time now. People disagree, but they don't want to tolerate their opponents. They don't think about them being human and being made in the image of God. Instead, the other side is evil. Now, what do you do with evil people? You have to shut them up. You have to embarrass them. You have to have them lose their jobs. It's a pretty scary prospect. He said, by the way, he's not suggesting at the end of the chapter that the old tolerance always got things right. He said, I'm old enough to remember when in parts of our country, African Americans couldn't sit in the front of the bus. It was not, here's that word, it was not tolerated. Yeah. So he said, it's good that we're getting rid of some of that stuff. He says, prejudice never disappears completely. We're wise to have ongoing warnings about it. And then he quotes Bernard Goldberg at the end of the chapter. Bernard Goldberg wrote a book called Bias. He was a CBS correspondent. That's a good book. I read that one. He's got another book, Goldberg, 100 People Who Are Screwing Up America. I haven't read that one. I have no idea who's on that list, but here's what Goldberg says as he's winding up the chapter here. Carson quotes him. Here's the problem, as far as I'm concerned. Over the years, as we've become less closed-minded and more tolerant of all the right things, like civil rights, somehow we became indiscriminately tolerant. Right? You hear that? Indiscriminate. That's an interesting comment. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. You're so judgmental, Goldberg goes on saying. That became a major league put down in Anything Goes America, as if being judgmental of crap in the culture is a bad thing. Yeah, I like Goldberg. So notice what Goldberg says. It was good, right? We're more tolerant of things like civil rights. Well, good. That's important. But he says we became indiscriminately tolerant. We tolerate everything these days. Yeah, I'll just leave it to your imagination. But, I mean, look at the groups that are protesting different things, some of the things that are on the internet. And people tolerate everything. And it's horrific. We're heading towards some really dangerous things. So anyway, that's his first chapter. Second chapter, What's Going On? I like that title, just to give you an idea of where this thing is going. And he moves then into things like jottings on the history of tolerance, the church and Christian truth claims, tolerance, democracy, and majoritarianism, and then ways ahead. That's so important. Instead of just grousing and complaining, he's going to offer some things that could be done about it. So we'll get to those. So again, this is D.A. Carson, The Intolerance of Tolerance. Good book, good read. All right, well, thanks, and hope you're having a good day, and we'll do another podcast soon.